Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Well, thank you, Honourable Speaker. It is always an honour to rise in the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia to represent the people of Vancouver Kingsway. I think that the people of Vancouver Kingsway, and I'm sure MLAs representing all of British Columbia feel the same way, represent some of the qualities the previous speaker, the Minister of Children and Families, underlined. I just think of a dear friend of mine, a dear friend of the community, Jagat Ram, who came from Fiji to Canada. He'd been in the police forces and the military in Fiji, and he was the parade marshal in South Vancouver of the Remembrance Day ceremony in most years, and he was involved in Veterans Committee, and everybody who knew him from the small businesses that he frequented, the Bamboo Cafe and La Panderia Bakery, to the people who knew him and who were inspired by him, to his family. He lived in our area. He did not have much, Honourable Speaker, but what he contributed was enormous. I think of Barry Laundrie, who is a volunteer at Collingwood Neighbourhood House. He is on disability, federal disability, and he suffered a number of years ago. Members of the government should know this, because disability rates in British Columbia have been frozen for a long time. Of course, income assistance rates continue to be frozen in British Columbia. Barry's income would go up by the rate of inflation. It would be a small amount, 1%, 2%, and suddenly he went past the threshold where he could get an inexpensive bus pass. And so we as a community, including myself and many others in the community, ultimately got together. He was in the strange position of losing ground to inflation effectively, and then the moment he crossed that threshold, losing something that was worth, on his very meager income, an enormous amount of money to him. In fact, members will know about $600 a year. Can you imagine you're getting by week to week, day to day on what you live on, and then suddenly, because your pension goes up by 2%, while other people in the position of disability get nothing year after year after year, that 2% costs you. But Barry is not, and people who know him wouldn't tell you this, is not a person who engages in rancor. It's why he's so beloved in the community. He volunteers and helps serve community meals. And our community breakfast program every Saturday morning, where people largely come from outside the riding and are served breakfast at Collingwood Neighbourhood House. Barry is the chef, and he does an extraordinary job. But the fact of the matter is, for all he contributes, there is nothing that you could say if you knew Barry Laundrie that would suggest to him that he was undeserving or not a contributor, had not worked a long time in his life and then was unable to work, but continues to volunteer with all his heart and soul, and lost a $600 benefit a few years ago. And the idea that people in those circumstances, not people who receive a massive tax cut at a high income level, they're not asked to pay for their tax cut. They're not asked to pay for their tax cut, Honourable Speaker. They're not asked to do that. But when members on disability, the Minister of Health, Honourable Speaker, should know better. He should know better, Honourable Speaker. The government is about choices, and the government, in that case, made a choice, and that choice was to give a tax cut to the richest British Columbians, even though we live in the most unequal province in Canada in terms of income and in terms of wealth, Honourable Speaker. Even though we live in such a province, instead of using that money to support people like Barry, and in his circumstance, they have to pay for their benefit increase. So you get and then you claw back. That's the idea for them. That's not the way it is for the top 2%, Honourable Speaker, in this budget and from this government. Honourable Speaker, with respect to hydro rates, and 28% increases, which have been used to create the charade of a balanced budget year after year. Deferral accounts and rate increases that are hidden taxes because they are intended to increase revenue to the government, which would otherwise have been in deficit. Well, Speaker, and right now, in this budget year, the Minister of Energy and the government is proposing, and it makes sense because they have so mismanaged the energy portfolio of the province that we have a surplus right now because they forced BC Hydro to buy expensive power, Honourable Speaker. They are giving this year, Honourable Speaker, a deferral of payments by mining companies, Honourable Speaker. They're offering that. Not, Honourable Speaker, I might add, to people such as Barrie. Not, I would add, people such as Barrie, who might also need a deferral, who find unlimited incomes, a 28% increase when you are on a fixed income in this province, in the Metro Vancouver, with housing being what it is, whether you are renting or owning, and in the rest of the province where incomes are under challenge, there was nothing in this budget, not a centime, not a lira, not a nickel for the miners who were laid off, 2,000 of them laid off in the past year, Honourable Speaker, since the government announced that we were the province of mining in a previous throne speech, Honourable Speaker. Not a centime for them. Scraps off the table, Honourable Speaker. And yet, Honourable Speaker, this is the way we do business in British Columbia, Honourable Speaker. And so I think it is inconsistent. I think of our neighborhood house in our community, which I think does admirable things, Honourable Speaker. In our whole community, we welcomed something called the Kingsway Continental. It used to be the Continental downtown. People who know Vancouver will know it, where people who have nothing is operated by the City of Vancouver, is a plan of the City of Vancouver. We moved some of the most vulnerable housing directly in the middle of my constituency at what used to be the Ramada. And the place was upgraded and it's used for that. And the community, Honourable Speaker, none of this, not in my backyard stuff, none of this, Honourable Speaker, even though people are obviously heavily invested, anyone who has tried to buy a home in Vancouver, including in Vancouver Kingsway, know the challenges, Honourable Speaker. None of that stuff. Welcomed when people came into our community in those circumstances, Honourable Speaker, partly because I think of the generosity of the community, partly because of the generosity of some of the church community and of the neighborhood community. They were welcomed, Honourable Speaker. Welcome gifts were brought, not protest, welcome gifts. That's how you act when your neighbors are in need and need support and need to be welcomed in a community, Honourable Speaker. And I'm so proud of the work people in my community are doing with respect to the welcome of Syrian refugees. There's as many people know, if they drive up Kingsway in Vancouver, there's actually a city-owned motel. It used to be, when we arrived, our family arrived in British Columbia in 1969. We drove up Kingsway, we stayed in a motel on Kingsway, like everyone else. It's kind of the heritage of Kingsway, I dare say it. That's a controversial question, that motels might be deemed as heritage, but that's what Kingsway used to be. The 2400, which people will know is in the heart of Vancouver Kingsway, the heart of Kingsway, where today several dozen refugees from Syria are starting their new life in Canada and welcomed by the community and supported by the community. And supported not just by people who have, but people who have very little, but are offering what they have. And I think that speaks to who British Columbia is and what British Columbia is. And I have to say, this is one of the most disappointing, unprepossessing, politically self-absorbed budgets I have witnessed in British Columbia in the years I've been following BC politics, which is, sadly, Honourable Speaker, probably too many years. It's quite a few years, Honourable Speaker. It's quite a few years. This is a budget that starts at its core, Honourable Speaker, starts with not anything connected to what is happening at the 2400 Motel or at that Kingsway Continental or with Barrie Laundry or the best of British Columbia, but an act of self-absorption, which is the creation of a fantasy fund around LNG, Honourable Speaker, of $100 million. A fantasy fund which is, Honourable Speaker, a sop to the Premier's illusions, Honourable Speaker. We utterly failed And instead of coming clean about that failing, we want to go to $100 million. You know, maybe Gordon Wilson could have devised the website we would have needed, Honorable Speaker, to decide the government's agenda with respect to LNG, the success of it, Honorable Speaker. Because interestingly, no matter what number you would have put in the input, 10 million, if it was the Premier, it would have been 100 billion, so you would have to leave a lot of space, times 0 equals 0, Honorable Speaker. That's what's actually in the fund, Honorable Speaker. And then if you put another number in, maybe 800 billion, because the Premier's new programs will probably be done over 800 years, Honorable Speaker. 800 billion times 0, the answer would be still 0, Honorable Speaker. But this is at a time when there's significant need, both in the interior of the province, where very important resource industries, and you don't have to ask me, you just have to look at the budget to see its impact on government revenue. But what that hides is its impact on employment in the interior of the province, Honorable Speaker, in resource industries. So you don't have to take it from me that there's struggles in resource communities around BC. We know there's struggles. The numbers tell a very clear story of those struggles. And instead of responding to that in a practical way, Honorable Speaker, we have a fantasy fund created out of self-aggrandizement and self-absorption by a Premier and a government that are completely out of touch with the reality of Metro Vancouver, the reality of Vancouver Island, the reality of the interior of the province, completely out of touch. To use that as a signature piece of a budget, Honorable Speaker, to pretend that a fund exists related to LNG that does not exist, Honorable Speaker, because you don't want the Premier to look bad, I think speaks to the credibility of the budget and the credibility of the government. Now, we also, Honorable Speaker, and I spoke about this, the real struggles of the province, which belie, Honorable Speaker, if you actually meet with real people, the comments from the members on the government side of the floor, of a province where it is increasingly difficult for people in, not just low-income people, but middle-income people, to succeed and to get ahead, and for their children to aspire to what we would hope would be the case, which is a better life than our generation, Honorable Speaker. We have the highest levels of inequality, and anybody who looks seriously, whether they're the Minister of Health or anyone else, Honorable Speaker, at social determinants of health, understand that high levels of inequality are bad for the economy, bad for society, bad for communities. And we have the highest absolute levels of inequality in the country. And some of that, Honorable Speaker, not all of it, because there are other factors pressing on wages and so on, although we have some of the worst wage growth in the country, which means that people, as costs go up in British Columbia, incomes are not keeping pace and people are struggling. And there seems to be no awareness from the Premier or the Minister of Finance that this is actually happening in the real world, not in the world of Victoria, not in the world where trying to convince, Honorable Speaker, a small group of journalists that you've succeeded in something, but in the real world beyond that, which journalists are very much a part, Honorable Speaker, that there's real struggle going on. Instead, Honorable Speaker, they have doubled down on the inequality of the tax system. And this has been going on, of course, for years and continues in this budget. There's a discussion of medical services premiums. And before the budget, the Premier said there's something wrong here, we're going to take action. And ultimately, what happened was that medical services premiums as a share of the provincial budget went up again, Honorable Speaker. In fact, if you take it over the Premier of the Liberal time in office, Honorable Speaker, as a share of the budget, so this is a fair comparison, medical services premiums have increased by 85%. You know what's increased more? Honorable Chair, you'll be aware of this because you have, in your community of Burnaby, outstanding post-secondary institutions. Tuition fees, they've gone up more. Tuition fees have gone up 200%. They're starting to close in on all natural resource revenues. That's how much we're charging in tuition fees, Honorable Speaker. They used to be, when this government took office, 1.5% of the budget, Honorable Speaker. They're now more than double that. And what that does, Honorable Speaker, in a society where inequality is high, is it takes away the means of what we might call social mobility, but which all of us understand is our children getting ahead, getting the education they need to get the jobs they need and to support their own families into the future, something surely as a society we should be promoting, Honorable Speaker. And instead, we have a government that has increased flat taxes that hammer the middle class, and they did it again in this budget, Honorable Speaker. Increase hydro rates, ICBC rates, MSP premiums that hammer the middle class, and then they deny the children of the middle class the right to the education they need to get higher incomes, Honorable Speaker. This is government policy in a province that has the highest inequality of any jurisdiction in the country. Surely that doesn't make sense. Surely a government that saw this and saw the shift onto the middle class of the tax burden that was taking place would not have done what this government did and repeated in this budget, which is a tax cut for the rich, Honorable Speaker. They would not have done that. And yet, Honorable Speaker, in a province, again, we're not just talking about inequality of income, but inequality of wealth, Honorable Speaker, the highest levels of inequality in the country. We have a government that's doubling down on this, that is engaging in tax measures that increase the level of that inequality. I mean, how can you imagine that that would make sense for this province? And further, in terms of the photo op element of the budget, exemplified by the government's fantasy fund, which does not exist in fact. It is a contrivance. It is a homage to the Premier's ego, Honorable Speaker. At a time with all this going on, all those struggles, can you imagine what people who've been laid off in Tumbler Ridge, Honorable Speaker, might think of that at this time? Or in Vancouver? Or what people who are finding it increasingly difficult to live in Metro Vancouver think of that, Honorable Speaker? And yet, that is the priority of the government. MSP increases, which is a continuation of a 15-year Liberal policy that they make worse every single year. It's going to be worse according to the 3-year plan in 2017-18. It's going to be worse again in 2018-19. And they did nothing to change it. Someone earning $50,000 pays the same as someone earning $250,000. They did nothing to change the fundamental basis of that. Well, at the same time, members on that side of the House, Honorable Speaker, cut taxes for the rich. Can you imagine? And I am telling you, Honorable Speaker, especially, and this is true in lots of regions of the country, but the member for Chilliwack Hope knows this, that those changes, Honorable Speaker, whether you live in Vancouver with high real estate values or other communities with lower real estate values, damage and hurt the middle class. And that's what they've done. They've particularly done it with respect to BC Hydro and with respect to ICBC. Now, it's hard to imagine this, people will imagine, because, you know, the last 5 years have been a change to this. Until 2010, ICBC didn't actually transfer cash to the province. But that was a change brought in, an innovation brought in by the Liberal government to deal with their fiscal situation at a time in the usual way that they've tried to deal with it, which is a mirage. But at BC Hydro, Honorable Speaker, what we've seen is a dramatic growth in deferral accounts. Deferral accounts that they have no plan to pay for. Deferral accounts that help them pretend to have profit that did not exist in fact. Deferral accounts that help them pretend to balance the budget when they didn't. And then rate increases that are paying for are essentially false tax increases, Honorable Speaker. They are tax increases. The BC Hydro and the BCUC were ordered to allow them to happen by the provincial cabinet. They were tax increases designed to protect the share of money for the provincial government. And they go out and make the, I've heard a dozen statements say, oh, we're not raising taxes. They're raising taxes. When you do that, that is raising taxes. And the Minister of Energy is doing it. All of this landing on the middle class, Honorable Speaker. All of this landing and the inability to fund programs of change, Honorable Speaker. And I find it
fascinating, I guess, Honorable Speaker, interesting that what's happened on the program side for people who fall below that margin, who require sometimes the support of government to get by, what it means for them. And we saw that on this issue of bus passes, Honorable Speaker. I mean, there's no discussion on the government side, none, of proceeding with reforms to disability that wouldn't claw back from people. And that just shows a government that's out of touch. I don't know if people understand, because we've done struggles. I've had lots of casework, not just in my own constituency, but from around BC, with people who were on federal disability, like Barrie Laundrie, in Vernon and other communities, who, because they had a 2% increase in their disability, lost their bus pass a couple of years ago. And the reason they lost their bus pass is that the province wasn't increasing disability rates for everybody else. Again, Honorable Speaker, this government is out of touch with the reality of what people are dealing with in the province. They are pounding the middle class with these tax increases that they pretend are something else. They're called premiums, they're called hydro rates, they're called ICBC rates, they're called tuition fees, but let's make no mistake about it, and the budget is clear on this point, they are tax increases on the middle class. Tax increases designed, Honorable Speaker, to protect what the government has been doing, which is to reduce the share of taxation paid progressively. That is what they have consistently done. That is what they've done in this budget, Honorable Speaker. And it is, Honorable Speaker, in a time of rising inequality when people are struggling, it is shameful, Honorable Speaker. And on critical issues to the public in British Columbia, whether they be incomes and employment in the interior, where aside from a new slush fund, nothing substantive has been done, Honorable Speaker. And in Metro Vancouver, where people are going through a housing crisis that is affecting everybody wherever they live and whatever their circumstances. The government has done nothing, Honorable Speaker, of substance. They are trying to dress around the edges. It is the photo op budget in that sense. Because housing is not a perception problem for the Premier in Metro Vancouver. It is an actual problem requiring serious and comprehensive solutions. And instead what we have is a government trying to pretend that they are responding to those problems that they have failed to address year after year after year after year in a photo op budget that will have almost no impact on real people who are struggling in this housing market. Not a dime, not a centime for renters, Honorable Speaker. And in my community, I think, Honorable Speaker, the main means in this context where we have a government that appears to be at war with the middle class, Honorable Speaker. I mean, people talk about class war politics, Honorable Speaker. It's the government, Honorable Speaker. It's the government that is engaging in class war politics here. Because the means through which people progress, where people rise, Honorable Speaker, is through our education system. And again, Honorable Speaker, and the Minister of Health can talk all he likes, Honorable Speaker. He'll have an opportunity to speak in this House, and I look forward to him doing it, Honorable Speaker. Because he knows, and I know, Honorable Speaker, that this kind of photo op politics was fundamentally damaging to the Ministry of Health 4 years ago, where they were ordered, Honorable Speaker, to smear employees of the Minister of Health by the Premier's office, Honorable Speaker. He knows that. And he feels, I'm sure he feels, well, you know, that's somebody else, and somebody else was responsible, and somebody else put RCMP in the press release. That was the smear they did then, Honorable Speaker. Shameful. And we're still speaking about it now, and we'll be speaking about it for some time, Honorable Speaker. But the key means through which people in my community, and they love our public schools in our community, and I think one of the extraordinary things about teachers and students and parents and what they do in our public schools, they can be seen every day. They can be seen this week on the basketball court, Honorable Speaker, where teams from Gladstone and Windermere are taking part in the AAA Lower Mainland tournament, and I'm hopeful we'll be provincial champions. One of them, it would be great if they played each other in the finals. But also every day, there's no school more than Windermere School in my riding, where the students at secondary school volunteer more in elementary schools in the area. And what people who work in schools in British Columbia know is that they are being pushed and pushed and pushed. Their opportunities less and less and less. And that the government's decision to claw back again more money from our public schools this year is going to hurt again the quality of education at a time, Honorable Speaker, when people working in education are doing heroic and extraordinary things, students and parents and teachers and support workers. And instead of saying to those people, we're going to give you a little bit of help this year, the government has pushed them down again. And I think it's irresponsible. And with respect to public schools in our community, public schools of which we're very proud, or public schools in my neighboring community, my neighboring MLA, the member for Vancouver-Fraserview, who's essentially advocating in Vancouver public schools, having run for the nomination in Quilchena, representing Vancouver-Fraserview, arguing for the closure of schools that are vital in her community, Honorable Speaker. We should have a debate and a discussion about that and what schools mean in communities. But I can tell you what they mean in our community. Schools such as Carleton and Bruce, they may not mean anything to the Minister of Justice, but they mean something in our community, Honorable Speaker, in Vancouver-Kingsway. It's why we think they're important. And here is what they're doing, just to understand what the policy of the provincial government is. Norquay School is one of the biggest elementary schools in British Columbia in terms of enrollment. 660 students in that school, in Norquay School, 660. The school, because in Vancouver, historically, the East Side schools were built way bigger than the West Side schools when the population was different, Honorable Speaker. The capacity of the school is 800. Now, on their capacity judgments, they don't allow for music rooms, Honorable Speaker, anything else. What they're arguing, what the Liberal government is arguing around Norquay School, is that 660 students isn't enough. We have to add another 100 students. We have to get rid of the music rooms, Honorable Speaker. That's what they're suggesting. At a time when Norquay School is itself doing extraordinary things, even under all the difficulties that have occurred in education, all the disputes, they're doing remarkable things. And instead of helping them, they're dealing with government cuts, forced on the school board by the government, and they're dealing, Honorable Speaker, with threats to the very schools that support neighborhoods in Vancouver-Kingsway and across communities across the province. And all this talk about, oh, there are too many schools and everything else, Honorable Speaker, schools of 600 generally aren't slated for closures anywhere in the world, Honorable Speaker. But they're targets here, Honorable Speaker, and local MLAs need to speak for them, and they play a vital role in our community in Vancouver-Kingsway. You know, they got rid of our local community health center, Honorable Speaker, but our public schools are vital to our neighborhoods, and we intend to fight and support them. Honorable Speaker, in conclusion, we have a province that has, Honorable Speaker, always been a great place to live and continues to be a great place to live, but we have struggles and we have challenges. One of those challenges, Honorable Speaker, is that we need, Honorable Speaker, to support communities and to support people so that they can achieve all they can achieve in life. And instead we have a government that seems to believe, Honorable Speaker, that more inequality, not less, is the important thing, and uses the instruments of government, Honorable Speaker, to deny that opportunity to so many in our province. It's why we need, Honorable Speaker, and we will have soon enough, a change in government. But we also need, Honorable Speaker, a change of mindset. That the government, Honorable Speaker, to members on the Liberal cabinet, I fear, has become the place they hang out with their deputy ministers, and not the people's house, Honorable Speaker. That's how you can conspire about the release of a report, Honorable Speaker, about the death of a child. That's how you can conspire to make health researchers look bad for your political interests, Honorable Speaker. That's where you can do those things. That's where you can create a fantasy fund where nothing existed before. That is the approach, Honorable Speaker, that leads to the folly of this budget, a lost opportunity for the people of BC, and why this province so desperately needs a change in direction and a change in the soul of its government. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker.